A fist pounded against the glass door, once, twice. Then a whole hand, flat and shaking, pressed against it. Outside, an old man swayed on his feet. Beside him, a woman gripped his arm to keep them both upright. A gray old dog lay down in the snow and didn't get up. The man's mouth moved behind the glass. No sound came through. Inside, a big man in an apron looked up from the counter. Thick neck, crew cut going gray. He'd spent 20 years learning to read a threat in half a second, and this wasn't one. This was worse. Caleb Whitfield set down the rag. He walked to the door he was about to lock and turned the bolt the other way. What that old couple told him before sunrise would break something loose in him he thought was gone for good. Stay with me on this one. Now here's the thing you have to understand about the man behind that counter. Caleb Whitfield did not get visitors after dark. That was on purpose. His diner sat alone on a 2-lane road in the Blue Ridge foothills of North Carolina. The kind of place you only find because your phone lied to you about a shortcut. One gas pump out front, dead for years. A hand-painted sign that just said eat. Inside, 8 stools, 4 booths, and a coffee pot that never fully shut off. Caleb ran the whole thing himself. Cooked, served, cleaned, locked up. He liked it that way. He was 51 years old and built like a man who used to do something a lot harder than fry eggs. 20 years in the Navy. Most of it with the teams, though he never said those words to a customer. If somebody asked, he'd just say he used to work on boats. That usually ended the conversation, which was the point. He'd bought the diner 4 years back with money he'd been sitting on and no real plan. People in town figured he was hiding from something. They weren't wrong, but they figured it was the law or a bad marriage or a bottle. It was none of those things. It was quieter than that, and it was heavier, and he carried it the way you carry a stone in your boot. You learn to walk on it. You don't take it out. So when that pounding came at 9 at night in the middle of the first real cold snap of November, his first instinct was to say no. He'll tell you that himself. His hand was already on the light switch. Then he actually looked. The man out there had to be 80, maybe more. He was wrapped in an old wool coat 2 sizes too big, and his lips had gone a color lips aren't supposed to be. The woman beside him was smaller than the coat the man wore. Her whole body was shaking, and not just from the cold, from the effort of standing. And that dog. That old bloodhound had folded itself down into the snow like it had decided that was as far as its legs would ever take it again. Caleb opened the door. Cold came in like a slap. The old man tried to speak, and his teeth were chattering too hard to let him. "We can't walk anymore," the woman said. Her voice was thin but steady, and she looked Caleb dead in the eye when she said it, the way proud people do when they've run all the way out of pride. "Our car died, back down the road a ways, and I'm sorry to trouble you. We've been to every motel in town." "They're all full," the old man managed. "They're not full," the woman said, gentle, correcting him without shame. "Harold, they're not full. They looked at us and they said full. There's a difference and you know it." And that right there told Caleb everything. 2 motels in that town, and it was the dead of the off-season. Nobody was full. Somebody just didn't want the bother of 2 frail old people and a sick dog who might die in a room and leave a smell and a story. So they'd sent them back out into 28 degrees to be somebody else's problem. "How far did you 2 walk?" Caleb asked. "From the car," the woman said. "That's 2 miles. "Is it?" she said, and gave a little laugh that had no air behind it. It felt further. Caleb looked down at the dog. The bloodhound lifted its head and looked back at him with wet, tired eyes and thumped its tail once against the frozen ground. Just once, like it was being polite. Something in Caleb's chest turned over. "Come in," he said. "All 3 of you. Get in here before the dog freezes to the sidewalk." He got them inside, got the door shut against the wind. The old man nearly went down the second he stopped moving. his legs finally giving up now that they were allowed to, and Caleb caught him under the arm. He weighed nothing. That was the thing that got Caleb, a grown man, and he weighed nothing at all. "Easy," Caleb said. I got you, I got you." He sat them in the booth closest to the wood stove in the corner, the one he kept going on cold nights for himself. The woman helped the old man out of his big coat, fussing over him, and the man kept saying he was fine, don't make a fuss. The dog crawled under the table and lay down on Caleb's boots and let out a long groan of a sigh and stayed there. "Coffee," Caleb said, "and I got soup. Give me 2 minutes." Now understand, there were rooms in the back of that diner, a little hallway behind the kitchen, 3 doors. Caleb slept in one. The other 2 he kept locked, and in 4 years he had never once opened them for another living soul, not the health inspector, not the woman from the church who wanted to store the food drive boxes. Nobody. People in town had all kinds of theories about what he kept back there. That night, for the first time, he took his keys off his belt, walked back, and opened both of those doors. He didn't stop to think about it. That's what he'd tell you. He just did it the way you move before your brain catches up, and by the time his brain caught up, the doors were open and the choice was made. While the soup heated, Caleb carried things out of those 2 back rooms. Blankets, real ones, thick wool, 2 space heaters still in their boxes, a folding cot, a dog bed brand new, tags still on it, that had no business being in the home of a man who did not own a dog. He set the soup down in front of the old couple and went back for more, and the woman watched him with a strange, searching look on her face, like she was trying to place him. "You keep all this back there?" she asked. "For what?" Caleb didn't answer right away. He set the dog bed down by the stove and coaxed the bloodhound onto it, and the old dog stepped onto it and turned around twice and dropped like a sack, and was asleep before Caleb straightened up. "For a night like this, I guess," he finally said. "Never had one till now." That was mostly a lie, and he knew it was a lie while he said it. But he didn't have the words yet for the true version. The old man ate slowly. His hands shook, and the woman quietly moved his coffee closer so he wouldn't have to reach. Caleb pulled a chair over from a table and sat backward on it, arms folded on the top rail, and watched them eat, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt useful, not busy. Useful. There's a difference, and if you felt it, you know. "Harold and Mabel Doyle," the woman said, like she just remembered they hadn't introduced themselves. "I'm Mabel. This old goat is Harold, and that's Scout under your feet, though I think he's abandoned us for you now." "Caleb," he said. "Well, Caleb," Mabel said, and her voice caught on something and she pushed through it. "You're the first person tonight who looked at us like we were people. I want you to know that, whatever else happens, you looked at us like we were people." Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he got up and got the coffee pot and filled everybody's cup, including his own. He asked where they were headed. Mabel said they'd been driving south, no fixed address to it, which was a strange way to put it, and Caleb noticed the strangeness and let it sit. Harold, warmed up now, started talking a little in that slow, careful way of a man rationing his breath. He talked about the dog mostly. Scout was 14, deaf in one ear, bad hips. "He's outlived everything else we had," Harold said, and Mabel put her hand on his arm and Harold stopped talking. Caleb let the quiet be. He was good at quiet. Outside, the wind kept up its noise against the windows, and the stove ticked, and the old dog snored, and for a little while the 3 of them just sat there in the warm with their coffee. And here's where you might think the stories found its shape. Kind man, cold night, a good deed done. Everybody warm, everybody safe. Caleb even thought it himself. He looked at the 2 of them settling, the color back in Harold's face, Mabel's shoulders finally coming down from around her ears, and he thought, all right, that's that. Get them through the night, get their car towed in the morning, send them on their way. Simple. He got up to bank the stove for the night. He set 2 mugs in the sink. He told them the cot was theirs and he'd take the booth, and Mabel started to argue, and he told her kindly that arguing with him was a waste of a night's sleep. She smiled. Harold's eyes were already closing. The dog didn't move. Caleb reached over and turned the front light off so the road wouldn't see them lit up back there, and that, he figured, was the end of it. It was not the end of it. He was pulling the wool coat off the hook by the booth, meaning to lay it over Harold like a blanket, when the coat turned in his hands and the light from the stove caught the left breast of it. There was a patch sewn there. Old thread, hand-stitched, the kind a wife sews on when the original's worn through. A shield, a trident laid across it, a number underneath. Caleb stopped moving. He knew that patch, he knew that number. He had worn that exact patch himself on a uniform in another life in a place he did not talk about. It was the patch of a unit, and more than that. It was the patch of one specific man, a man who had put a version of it on his own son's jacket once as a joke and a promise, a man Caleb had followed into places most people can't imagine and out of most of them. His commanding officer, dead 11 years. Caleb's throat went dry. "Harold," he said. His voice came out wrong and Mabel's head came up. "Harold, where did you get this coat?" Harold's eyes opened slow. He looked at the coat in Caleb's hands, and something old and heavy moved across his face. "That was our boy's," he said. "That's Danny's jacket." "My son's." The room went very quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold off a second. Harold's chin trembled and he steadied it. "He was Navy. Same as you, I think, though you didn't say. He wore that patch. He gave me the coat before his last time out. Said it was too small for him anyhow, said an old man needs the wool more than a young one does." Harold tried to smile and it broke. He didn't come home. 11 years this coming spring. Caleb sat down, not in the chair, on the floor. His legs just put him there the way Harold's legs had put Harold in the snow. "Daniel Doyle," Caleb said. Now Mabel went still. "Lieutenant Daniel Doyle," Caleb said again, and his voice cracked clean in half. "You called him Danny. He hated when the men called him Danny. He said if we were going to get shot at together, we could at least call him by his rank." Mabel's hand had come up over her mouth. Harold was staring at him, mouth open, no sound. "How?" Mabel whispered. "How do you know our son's name?" "Because I was there," Caleb said. "I was with him, at the end. I held your son's head in my lap in the back of a helicopter that couldn't fly fast enough, and I have spent 11 years trying to find the two of you to keep a promise I made to him, and I gave up. 2 years ago, I gave up looking. I told myself you were dead or you didn't want to be found, and I bought this diner and I stopped looking." He wiped his face with the heel of his hand, hard, angry at himself. "And you walked up to my door in the snow. Nobody moved. Nobody could. And listen, if you're still with me, if this is landing on you the way it landed on that room, take 1 second and hit that subscribe button, because the next part is the reason I sat down to tell you this whole thing in the first place. Then stay right here because Harold isn't done, and what Mabel had folded up in her purse changes everything." Harold reached out with a shaking hand and put it on Caleb's shoulder. "You're Whitfield," he said. "You're Chief Whitfield. Danny wrote about you, in his letters. You're the one he called the big quiet one." Caleb couldn't answer. He just nodded, and the tears came, and a grown seal sat on the floor of his own diner and cried in front of 2 strangers who weren't strangers at all. "He talked about you," Mabel said, and now she was crying too, but she was smiling through it, this fierce, bright smile. "In the letters, he said if anything ever happens to me, Whitfield will make sure you're all right. He said you were the most dependable man he ever knew. He said that man makes a promise, you can build a house on it." That undid Caleb worse than anything, because that was exactly the promise. He remembered it word for word. In the helicopter, with the noise and the blood and Danny going gray in his arms, the kid had grabbed Caleb's collar and pulled him down close and said, "My folks, Harold and Mabel, Blue Ridge, promise me you'll find them. Promise me they won't be alone." And Caleb had said the promise, and Danny had heard it. Caleb was sure Danny had heard it because the boy's hand had relaxed after, and that was the last thing his hand ever did. "I tried," Caleb said. "You have to know I tried. I went to the last address the Navy had. There was a foreclosure sign on it. I asked the neighbors and they said the Doyles had moved and nobody knew where. I hired a man to look. Nothing. Every year on his birthday I'd start again. And every year I'd hit the same wall. And 2 years ago We moved a lot," Mabel said quietly. "After Danny, we couldn't afford the house. Harold got sick, the medical it. We sold what we could and then we sold the house and then..." She stopped. She looked at her husband. "We've been staying with our nephew in Ohio, but there was a falling out end. We were driving to my sister's," Harold said, "in Georgia, to ask if we could stay a while. That's the truth of it. 2 old people and a dog driving to beg a bed off a sister who's near as broke as we are. Then the car quit." Caleb understood then what no fixed address had meant. He understood the whole shape of it now, and it was worse than he'd let himself imagine an hour ago when he was congratulating himself on a good deed. These weren't travelers. These were the 2 people he had sworn a dying man he would protect, and life had ground them down to a dead car and a bloodhound and a wool coat, and they had walked 2 miles through the snow to knock on doors that shut in their faces, and one of those doors had been his. "How sick?" Caleb asked. He looked at Harold. "You said you got sick. How sick, Harold?" Harold waved a hand. "I'm old is all." "He has cancer," Mabel said plainly, the way she said everything. "The doctors in Ohio said, well, they said there's a number of months and it's not a big number. That's why the sister. That's why any of it. I'm not going to be able to." Her voice finally cracked all the way through and she pressed her lips together and breathed until it passed. "I'm not going to be able to take care of things by myself. When it comes to that, I don't have anybody." "Yes, you do," Caleb said. The words came out before he decided to say them. But once they were out, he knew they were the truest words he'd said in 11 years. "Now hold on," Harold started. "No, you hold on," Caleb said, and he got up off the floor and he pulled the chair around and sat in front of them properly, elbows on his knees close. "I'm going to tell you something and I need you both to hear it. I made your son a promise. I have carried that broken promise around for 11 years and it has damn near hollowed me out. You want to know what's in those back rooms nobody's allowed in? It's this. It's blankets and heaters and a dog bed I bought 3 years ago for no reason I could name. I think some part of me was getting a room ready. I think some part of me never stopped waiting for a night exactly like this one, even after my head gave up. And here you are." He reached out and took Harold's hand, that light shaking hand in both of his. "You're not driving to Georgia," Caleb said. "You're not begging a bed off anybody. Your son asked me to make sure you were never alone, and by God I am 48 hours from failing him for good, and you knocked on my door. You are going to stay here, both of you, right here, and I'm going to take care of what needs taking care of, Harold, all of it, right to the end and past it. That's not charity. Don't you dare hear charity. That's a debt I've been trying to pay for 11 years. You're going to let me pay it." Harold was crying now too, silent, the tears just running down into the white stubble on his jaw, and he was shaking his head, but it wasn't a no. It was the shake of a proud man who has been holding a weight alone for so long that being offered a hand feels like falling. "We can't ask that of you," he said. "You didn't ask," Caleb said. "Danny did, 11 years ago. I'm just late." Mabel made a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob, and she leaned across the table and put her hand flat on Caleb's chest, over his heart, the way you'd check a fever on a child. "He was right about you," she whispered. "Build a house on it," he said. "Build a whole house on it." They talked until 3 in the morning. Caleb learned things about Danny he'd never known, small human things, that the boy had been afraid of thunderstorms as a kid and had joined the Navy anyway, that he'd sent his mother a birthday card every single year, that he'd learned to cook exactly one dish, a terrible chili, and had been unreasonably proud of it. Caleb told them things too, careful things, the good ones. How Danny had carried a wounded man 3 miles once and never mentioned it. How the men would have followed him anywhere. How, at the very end, he wasn't afraid. Caleb gave them that whether it was exactly true or not. He gave them a son who wasn't afraid. Mabel opened her purse at one point and her hands trembled as she took out a photograph, soft and worn from handling. Danny in his dress uniform, grinning, 19 or 20. Caleb held it a long time. He remembered that grin. "Keep it," Mabel said. "No," Caleb said and handed it back. "That's yours, but I'll get a copy. I'd like to put it up, out front if that's all right with you, where people can see him." Mabel pressed the photo to her chest and nodded and couldn't speak. Somewhere in there, Scout the bloodhound woke up, hauled his old bones off the dog bed, and came and put his big heavy head in Caleb's lap and left it there. And Caleb, who had not let anything need him in a very long time, put his hand on the dog's head and left it there too. Sometime before dawn they slept. Harold and Mabel took the cot in the back room, the one that had been locked for 4 years, now warm from a heater and soft with real wool blankets. Caleb heard Harold protesting even as Mabel shushed him and got him settled. Caleb sat up in the booth by the stove, not tired, or too full of something to feel tired. He watched the window go from black to gray to the first cold blue of morning coming up over the foothills. Scout slept against his leg. And for the first time in 11 years, the stone in his boot didn't feel like it was cutting. It just felt like weight, and a man can carry weight. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, Caleb had made up his mind about the whole rest of it, the way he used to plan an operation, every piece in order. He fried eggs. He fried a whole mess of bacon, enough for 4 if you counted the dog, and he did count the dog. He set it all out on the counter, and the smell of it brought Mabel shuffling out first, and then Harold behind her, slow, one hand on the wall but standing on his own. "Sit," Caleb said, "eat, then we've got things to do." Over breakfast he laid it out. He'd already called Ray, who ran the tow yard first thing, and Ray was going to bring the Doyle's car in and Caleb was going to have it fixed, not because they'd need it to leave but because a car ought to run. He'd already called a buddy who did VA paperwork, because Harold was owed things nobody had ever helped him claim, benefits and care, and a name in a system that had lost him. And the back room, the second one, the other locked door, Caleb had opened that too that morning and started clearing it out. "That one's going to be a proper bedroom," he said. "Takes me a week, maybe 2. Real bed. Your own bathroom I'll knock a door through. You'll have your own place back there, warm, and the diner out front and me across the hall. Nobody sends you anywhere ever again." Harold set down his fork. "Son," he said, and the word landed in the room and just sat there because Harold heard himself say it and didn't take it back. "Son, a man can't just." "A man can," Caleb said. "This man is eat your bacon." Mabel laughed, wet and bright, and it was the best sound Caleb had heard in a decade. The car came in on Ray's truck an hour later. The VA man called back before noon, and in the weeks that followed, that lonely diner on the 2-lane road changed. Word got around town, the way it does, though never the whole story because Caleb never told the whole story. People just noticed there was an old fellow at the corner table now most mornings doing the crossword, and a woman who'd taken to running the register and knew everybody's name by the second visit, and a fat old bloodhound asleep by the wood stove who owned the place as far as he was concerned. Business picked up. Funny how that works. People can feel a place that's got life in it. The two motels that had turned the Doyles away that night, Caleb never said a word to either of them. He didn't need to. Mabel put a framed photograph up by the register within the week. Danny in his dress uniform, grinning that grin, and under it a little card in Caleb's blocky handwriting that just said, LT, Daniel Doyle. He looked after his people, so we look after his. Folks would ask about it. Mabel would tell them just enough. And more than one motel clerk came in for a burger, saw that photo, did the math on the old couple they'd sent back into the cold and left quieter than they came. Harold lived 9 months, longer than the number the doctors gave him, and Caleb always believed it was because a man doesn't die easy when he's finally warm and finally home and finally not a burden to anybody. Caleb took him to every appointment, sat with him through the bad days, learned to make Danny's terrible chili off a recipe Harold dictated from a chair, and they ate it together, and it really was terrible, and they laughed about it. Near the end, when Harold couldn't get out of bed, Caleb would carry him, that man who weighed nothing, out to the corner booth so he could watch the road and the morning come up over the ridge. And Harold, in the last clear conversation they had, held onto Caleb's collar the exact way his son once had and pulled him down close and said, "You keep your promise good, Chief." Danny knew. Danny always knew. And Caleb told him he loved him, which he had never said to a man out loud in his life, and Harold heard it. Caleb is sure he heard it because his hand relaxed after. Mabel stayed. Of course she stayed. The back rooms nobody was ever allowed into became her home for the rest of her days, and she ran that register and fed that dog table scraps she pretended she didn't, and she called Caleb my boy in front of customers until it stopped being strange and started being simply true. She was not alone. Not one single day of the rest of her life was she alone. Caleb had made a promise about that, and you could build a house on it. You could build a whole house. And sometimes late, after the last customer, Caleb would lock the front door and turn off the sign that said eat, and stand there a second with his hand on the bolt. And he'd remember a fist pounding on that glass on the coldest night of the year, and 2 people the whole world had turned away, and a dog that had lain down in the snow because it had nowhere left to go. And he'd think about how close he came to leaving that light off, how close he came to saying no. Half a second, either way. He never regretted turning that bolt the other way, not for one day of his life. Because the men in his old world used to talk about brotherhood like it was something loud, something you earned with blood and noise. And maybe it is, over there. But Caleb learned the truth of it on a freezing November night in a roadside diner. Brotherhood isn't the promise you make in the helicopter. Any man can make a promise when the noise is up and the moment's on him. Brotherhood is 11 years later when the noise is gone and everybody's forgotten and nobody would ever know if you didn't. It's the door you open when it's easier to leave it locked. It's the old man's hand in yours. It's the light you leave on for people who have been told all night long that there's no room. There was room. There was always going to be room. He just had to open the door.